So excited to have Councilman Robert White with me today on Those Who Give a Damn podcast. Welcome, Councilman, to the podcast on this morning. Really appreciate you taking time to speak to our audience about some of the pressing issues across the District of Columbia and also to give people an opportunity to learn more about your extraordinary journey in public service here in the District of Columbia. So welcome this morning.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you. So, Councilman White, I like to start these podcasts off with lived experiences. We all have lenses in which craft who we are as individuals and the work that we do and the work that we're so passionate about. Can you walk us through your lived experiences and how you became so passionate for public service and the most vulnerable in our community?
Absolutely. So, like people see me today, I'm like a buttoned up, pretty clean cut guy. I sometimes tell people this is my armor. For most of my life, I got into a lot of trouble, got suspended and expelled from school. I failed every single grade from third grade until my junior year in high school. In my sophomore year, my guidance counselor told me I'd never go to college. During that time, I'm saying massive gun violence in our city, including gun violence that took the lives of people I know, seeing my first drive-by at 9 years old, watching my family struggle through adulthood, like through the present day. And I had the opportunity to get really serious about school late in the game, my junior year in high school. And I just kept driving. Once I had enough belief in myself, I realized I wasn't going to let anybody stop me. So I went to college. I studied internationally, got my law degree, went to Capitol Hill to work for the delegate from DC, our hometown hero, Congresswoman Norton. And then I looked around the city one day after doing that for about 5 years and said, you know what? Folks like my family still aren't doing well enough. So with no business running for office and no backup plan, just the blessing of a patient and incredible wife, I quit my job, ran for office, and eventually became a council member. And I try to focus on the things that drove me to this: education, equity, the conditions of incarceration and post-release. And I hold myself to a really high standard of getting things done because I believe everybody can point to the problems. But if you're in a position of leadership, you've got to be solving some. And so that's something I take really seriously.
Wow, that's an incredible story, Councilman, and it really makes sense to why you're so passionate about those disparities, and even when we see you across the city, that motivation to our young people, right, is really, really key. And now I think the audience will really be able to understand a little bit more why you're so passionate in that area. I want to kind of dive into the vision for the future of the District of Columbia. How do you envision the future of housing in DC? And what steps are you taking to really address the affordability and accessibility across the District of Columbia?
Yeah, housing is one of the most important issues in the city, and it has been for some time. My grandparents bought our family house in DC in 1963 for $14,000. My grandfather worked two part-time jobs with a junior high school education, and that home became the safety net for everybody in the next two generations of my family. But in the past 20 years, almost every member of my family, other than me, because my wife and I are both lawyers, and my aunt and her family who live in that house that my grandparents bought, everybody else has been priced out of this city. And so this is something that is personal to me. I think if we just kind of, work around the margins, we're never going to make enough progress. So in addition to making sure we have funding for construction and preservation of affordable housing, I've pushed for some unique things that I think will make a drastic difference. Now, one is allowing the government to purchase existing apartment buildings and put covenants on them to limit how much the rent can cost, because that costs less than building a new unit and you get it quicker. So that's creating affordable housing essentially as quickly as you can fund that program. The other thing that I've been focused on since well before the pandemic, since 2015, is converting a lot of older office space downtown into housing. Now, the mayor and a lot of others were laughing at this idea in 2015 and 2016. Now they find themselves 5 years behind this strategy. We just don't need and will never need again as much office space as we used to have. So my vision for the future of the city is a network of neighborhoods across downtown. So some buildings get converted into housing, some become daycares, grocery stores, all the other things, parks that sustain communities. And when we do that, one, we have a vibrancy that we just don't have downtown. Like you go to downtown at 5:05, everything's closed. On the weekends, everything's closed. But if this is a residential space, then one, you've created a place for people who work in DC to be able to live here, but you've also created an economy that is alive 18 to 24 hours a day. So I want to see really an intense focus on building housing downtown. I have a vision for this. I have a plan. I believe I understand the mechanism that will get this done, but it requires vision and commitment to that plan. So that's something that I want to see happen. And it's something I've been pushing for years.
Absolutely. And one of the other things, Councilman, that I've learned over the course of talking to community leaders across the district is the district have very strong programs that assist the most vulnerable. However, they find it hard to obtain that information. They don't know that it's readily available to them.
Yep.
And how can the city do better, or community leaders do better by really filtering that information out to the most vulnerable?
So we have to have a strategy. I just don't believe you get much done without a strategy, and that's one of my big frustrations with government. From the perspective of a council member who doesn't run the government, we often do things without a strategy. So we have a lot of great programs, but you have various nonprofits doing, their own things. You have government agencies who have sometimes intersecting missions, and they're doing their own things, and it's not coordinated, which limits the number of people who know. But if we start to pull nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and agencies together so that they are coordinating and speaking with one voice, we reach more people to know about these programs. But the other thing we need is to get feedback from people in the programs. We need no program starts out perfect. You only get to great if you're getting feedback from people who use the program. What were your difficulties learning about the program? What were your difficulties going through the program? If there's something that you think people at the top of government need to know in terms of changes to these programs, what is that? When we get that constant flow of information going to people and from people, that's how you create great programs and great systems. We're not there, but in my vision of DC, we absolutely can get there.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've also learned is I actually teach a pathway scholar program at the University of the District of Columbia. One of the things that I noticed in that pathway program, Councilman, and I heard it consistently throughout the students that came through my class, is that the University of the District of Columbia is almost like a second option. My scholars are going all across the country to Spelman, they're going to Morehouse, they're going to North Carolina A&T, all of these great historical Black colleges and universities. But it's almost like UDC is this safe haven, like you
Hmm.
apply, but it's just a backup plan.
Yep.
And as someone who I'm actually finishing up my PhD there, and I understand how valuable and important the institution is and all the great resources that it has. What is your vision? And I know you're doing some work on the social work side, but what is your vision for us to really bring more awareness to what UDC has to offer? And not only what it has to offer, but how could we then create UDC to be that university for the DMV? So,
Yeah.
for example, those students who are in Prince George's County, Maryland, how do we attract them into UDC versus going to Howard Community College? How do we attract those students in Ward 7 and 8 who may not be necessarily prepared for those, bigger institutions, but we become a safe haven, right? There
Yeah.
seems to be a disconnect gap there. And what is your vision for all public institution, which is the only public, HBCU
That's right.
in the District of Columbia.
That's right. And the second oldest HBCU in the country. So
Absolutely.
it is a jewel that is not fully enough appreciated. In my family, my father, my brother, and my brother's son all started but did not complete college. All of them incredibly smart. This is not unique to my family. All across the district, you have some incredibly smart people who went away to college. It became unaffordable. They stopped part of the way through. They have a debt that they can't pay off, especially because they don't have a degree, and they're left lingering. These are the students that should be in UDC. We should be for giving scholarships for talented students with the provision that they finish their degrees at UDC. That's one thing. We get some of our top students there, and it's going to be primarily Black and brown students. The second thing I believe we need to do, and I've made some pushes for this from the council. If you graduate in the top 10 or 20% of your class in any DC school, public or private, you should be able to go to UDC tuition free. What this does is it starts to get our highest caliber students into UDC. It makes it more attractive. It raises its ratings, and then you can sort of level off those scholarship programs. But we've got to get our best and brightest. And I think the only way we do that is by reducing what they need to pay, making it virtually free. I think the state should pick up that cost until we get that momentum. The other piece is the leadership of the school. And I think we've had a good run with the past and the current presidents of UDC that have brought a level of professionalism and vision to the institution. So with good leadership, and then really pushing our top talented students into UDC by making it just easily accessible from a financial standpoint, I think we start to hit our highest heights, and then we'll get a momentum that's going to be really hard to stop. This is something that is overdue for UDC.
Absolutely. Last thing I'm gonna push you on there, Councilman, is that a lot of my students also said, in my podcast is they were like, we need to also have a more traditional setting of a campus.
Yeah.
They would stay home. And their vision in my class, I said, well, what is your vision for UDC? Now that you've learned more about it, I made them do some history work. What is your vision? They said, well, what if you had a traditional type campus east of the river? Like if we found a location and it becomes a premier campus with dormitories and the college is seated maybe east of the river with a more traditional setting, they said they would be more keen to staying home and attending that because they would get that traditional feel that they're get at North Carolina A&T Spelman Morehouse, right?
Yeah.
Has there been conversations in the council about creating a more traditional type campus at a more isolated location? As you know, UDC is kind of in the middle of everything there in Connecticut. Has there been conversation to build dormitories, et cetera, that really kind of attract best and brightest to stay home in the district?
Yeah. So that's not a recommendation I've heard specifically. And I would say if you look at some great colleges like GW here, Columbia, New York, these are right in the midst of the cities. But the difference between those two and UDC is they have dormitories. I think that's the biggest missing thing. And so whether it's in Van Ness where UDC is now or somewhere else in the city, I think a campus that has a more, as you said, traditional setting, but primarily dormitory space as well. I think that's going to change the perception of a lot of students. I think it's something that the university is starting to key into. So my hope is that they'll be able to identify some properties that they can use as dorms, and they can get the support of the city and hopefully even the federal government as a land grant institution to get that done. But I think dormitories are the biggest step in advancing the desirability for a lot of our young folks to want to go there because they don't want to stay at home. They don't mind staying in DC,
Right.
but I don't think they want to stay at home.
Right. No, thank you, Councilman, because I heard a lot of that in my last conversations with some of the graduates who are leaving. And so I wanted to elevate that in this conversation so that we can kind of have that robust conversation around and continue that conversation. The next piece I kind of want to go into is talking about, of course, teen crime in the city. That has been a pressing issue across the District of Columbia. And can you discuss the initiatives to engage with those at-risk youth? I know you've been actively engaged, a champion. Can you share with us those initiatives and then also the solutions to how we as community partners can help in this effort, Councilman?
Yeah. The biggest thing that any of us can do around this effort is engage and listen to young people. What I think is still lost on a lot of us who still think we're young, and I include myself in that category. Like I got to remind myself every day I'm just not young anymore. Is that young people today are not the same as young people even 10, 15 years ago. And so if we're going to meet them where they are, we have to first understand where they are. The idea that we have 11, 12-year-olds committing armed carjacking in this city, or to a very different example, we have some great scholars in our city who are missing the majority of the days of school. These are things that have to call out to us, leaders, that we have to intervene. What I see from the mayor and other people that I view as just too reactionary and not thinking deeply enough about what the problem is so we know how to solve the problem is we think penalty, penalty, penalty. But you're not going to penalize students who are traumatized out of that trauma. And so the keys to helping our young people, one, listening to them and meeting them where they are. Two, mental health. We have to make sure we are engaging our young people with mental health resources to help them sort through the traumas of the violence and poverty that they're seeing in their community and a global pandemic that they lived through in their formative years. We need to make sure we are wrapping around parents because there are a lot of parents who weren't parented. And now we're trying to be parents without ever having learned. And we've got to get those resources into the home so they can help their young people. And we need to focus on our schools. What is going to attract and keep our young people in schools? For some of our students, it's just the joy of learning. But for many of them, it's the arts, the music, it's sports, it's other things, it's technology that engage them and make them want to come into the school building. And the final thing is really making sure we're continuing to push and evolve our violence intervention programs. These are programs that should be engaging with and connecting with young people, among others, but they've been sort of operating, some of them doing great work, some of them doing so-so work, but without clear metrics, without like communicating with each other about what's working and what's not working. So it needs to be a coordinated approach, but that coordination happens around mental health, family engagement, and what's happening in schools that are going to keep them there. And in schools, the last thing I will say is I've really been a strong proponent of expanding vocational education. And so what I'm trying to get done right now is the biggest expansion of vocational education that we've ever seen in the city, paired with a city-wide mentoring network. So those are two things that I'm trying to create this year that I think will help our young people start to make better decisions and get onto better paths.
Absolutely. Last issue that we're going to talk about before we go into the complete your sentence segment is homelessness, right? You are one of the most strategic thinkers, I believe, on the council. What do you believe is the strategic, comprehensive plan to continue to see a decrease in homelessness across the city, Councilman?
Yeah, you do have to take a strategic approach. You can sort of pander to people, or you can figure out what's actually happening and fix those things. As I am in encampments and moving around the city, just talking to people who are unhoused to understand their situations, what I'm finding is that almost every unhoused person I talk to has already been approved for a housing voucher. So that tells me we have the resources, but a system that is too broken to help people. So as I dissected that further, what I found out was the biggest gaps are one, connecting people to social workers because we don't have enough social workers. That's why I created the free master's in social work program at UDC to help expand that pipeline. The second is housing inspections, because once people find a place that they want to live, the time it takes the government agencies to inspect it, the landlord has moved on because it takes too long. So then most folks have to go back to the back of the line. And so I'm working with the DC Housing Authority to contract out inspections so that they can happen more frequently. So what I've done is I've identified the log jams in the system, and I've put my focus on unclogging those log jams. We've got to do that. And I see like a lot of just kind of shuffling around of the deck chairs, and it doesn't solve anything. Homeless encampment clearings, it doesn't solve anything. It moves the problem from one place to the other. I am a firm believer that if you're in a position of leadership, you got to be solving things, and that's hard, but that's what we're called to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. We're going to move into my favorite part of the segment is the complete the sentence segment. And so we have three that we're going to go through today. And the first one is my message to the youth of DC striving for a better future is.
Be involved. I think more and more people see things in the world and in politics that they don't like, and they say, I don't want to be a part of that. You have to take the opposite approach. If you don't like it, get into that mix and help fix it. So I am so inspired by what I'm seeing from the generations coming behind us. I think they have the power to make changes that no previous generation has done, but that's going to require them to get involved and stay involved. And one thing I will say to them is, you are usually not going to get a win on your first try. So you got to be prepared to stay in this game. And the better you get, the better you understand it, the more wins you're going to get. So get involved and stay involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I could change one thing about DC overnight, it would be.
The level of seriousness in government about solving problems. I see a lot of PR. I see a lot of money being spent. I see a lot of plans, and we spend money printing these glossy books, but we don't implement. Strategy and implementation is what moves things forward, not PR, not glossy books. And that's a place that I want us to get. It's a place I believe we can get. I think looking at the talent from young folks to more experienced folks around this city, we have some of the smartest, most talented people across the world. And when they start to see a vision in government that they believe they can be a part of and make like a real difference in this world, they're going to plug in. And so my vision for the city is to create a vision that leaders, like real leaders, want to plug into. And we're going to move this city further than any city we've seen in the United States.
Absolutely. Last one. The most underrated aspect of local governance is.
Ooh, so so many. I would say that it is the difference between local and federal government. Federal government can go years without doing anything. In local government, you have to make a lot of decisions because you have to balance the budget, you have to fund the schools, you have to pave the roads, you have to fund a police force. And so in local government, you are making hard decisions every single day. And sometimes determining the right decision from the wrong decision is by a hair. And so it is underrated, like how difficult local government is, but also how fulfilling it is because you're looking at progress in real time.
Absolutely. So this is the last part of this that I'm going to ask you, and future aspirations. I think many across the district, really, including myself, we really fell in love with you during your last mayoral race. Do you have any aspirations to possibly run for mayor again in the district, being that the overwhelming majority, the LGBTQ community, young folks really stood behind you the last time, and you really won the hearts of so many Washingtonians? And with all the challenges that are facing the district, are there any aspirations there? I know you're in the middle of a re-election for councilman, right? I'm asking
Yep.
you that question. But as a visionary, are there any aspirations or hopes there?
I'll say this, in a race, the three-person race that included another council member and a two-term incumbent mayor, I was only 8%, eight percentage points short of winning. I have not just the same vision that I had, but I have an even more exciting vision than even 2 years ago. So to that, I'll say everything in God's time. I believe that if I run again in 2 years, One, we will win, and two, we will change the city in a way that we have never seen before. The last thing I will say is my wife has already given me the green light to run again. I am one to not put the cart before the horse. So I've got to win my reelection first. But after we knock this reelection out of the park, I'm going to be talking to voters about whether they have the appetite for the level of changes I want to see in the city, and I'm going to make my decision based on that.
Absolutely. So in the meantime, Councilman, can you please tell people how to get involved with your current campaign that'll be listening to this podcast?
Absolutely. So Robert White underscore DC on all social media. Well, let me not say all because I'm not on TikTok. So Twitter and IG, Facebook as well. You can email me at Robert at robertwhitefordc.com. Any of those ways. If you have like a policy related question, feel free to email me at rwhite@dccouncil.gov. But I'd love to hear from folks. And I know there are a lot of people around here who want to change the city. We're working with a lot of them now, but there are other folks who are trying to figure out how to plug in. So plug in with us.
Absolutely. And we'll pin that in the bio of this podcast when we publish it, Councilman. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for your leadership. You are an example for so many of us across this city and continue to champion that change that we so need here in the District of Columbia. Thank you again for joining those who give a damn, and we look forward to having you back on very soon.
I can't wait. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.